Okay, take two. Yeah, so I actually shot this video yesterday, all 20 minutes of it, only to discover when I uploaded it to my Mac that I had a giant booger hanging out of one nostril. And there was just no recovering from that. So, yeah, I'm redoing it, and hey, maybe it'll be better this time and a couple minutes shorter. The reason I'm making this particular video. Oh yeah, by the way, what's up, gangsters? I can't forget that part. Anyway, I'm at a point that I really enjoy where I'm done with all the projects that I've had on my menu, whatever you want to call it. And I have nothing on my bench that I feel like I have to work on. And I'm just sort of savoring the moment. I'm kind of just spending the week frittering about, testing some paint, tinkering with some bits and pieces of a Shelf of Doom project that I have. Just basically enjoying having total freedom of choice with no pressure. But, as we know, idle hands make the devil's mischief. And that is certainly the case with this video, because I think it's probably going to piss a few people off. We'll see. Anyway, the topic is conventional wisdom. And as always, this has been brought on by a bunch of stuff that I've seen on Facebook lately in model making groups. And, we're all familiar with conventional wisdom. It comes in all kinds of shapes and sizes. I mean, in 1903, conventional wisdom was that cars were never going to displace horses for daily transportation. Obviously, that didn't turn out to be true. In 1933, the conventional wisdom was that Germany was never going to rearm. We know how that turned out. It gets down to specifics, and these are my favorite kinds of conventional wisdom, the ones that sort of deal with scientific fact. If you've ever hung around with old farmers or guys who operate heavy machinery and who have ever seen a piece of cast iron break, you might hear somebody say, "Well, that sure looks like it must have crystallized." Yeah, well, that is complete and total horseshit for a couple of reasons. Metals do not mysteriously, spontaneously, and miraculously transmogrify their atomic structure. In fact, the atomic structure of metals doesn't change unless it's precipitated by some type of event that is almost always accompanied by extremely high temperatures. That's how you normalize a piece of steel. You heat it up and you let it cool down really slowly, and the crystalline structure realigns itself, and it becomes a little softer. And the thing about cast iron is, it's actually born with an almost completely crystalline structure. So it's there to begin with. It didn't suddenly become crystalline and then fracture. But, that's how conventional wisdom happens. And this particular case of conventional wisdom that I'm going to start with, I'm going to talk about three. This first one I'm going to talk about is definitely one of those where people have observed things and then probably made some conflations and decided that it was, in fact, a fact, when it's really not. And it's one that we've all heard and probably witnessed scuffles erupt on Facebook about, and that's this one. You must use a gloss layer before you put down decals. It's one of my favorites. It's always so entertaining. And it's often accompanied or stated in all caps. You must gloss before decals, as if the size of the letters somehow makes it more true. And I'm pretty sure I know how this thing got started. Long ago in a galaxy far, far away, some model maker discovered to his horror that he had silvering underneath his decals. And, the decals probably weren't that good back in the day. His paint may not have been very smooth, but he obviously was determined not to let that happen again. So the next time on his next model kit, and I keep emphasizing next because that obviously means not the same kit, not the same decals, not the same paint, not the same conditions that he was applying the decals on before. And so that kind of destroys the experiment. But nonetheless, this guy came up with the bright idea of putting a clear coat over his paint because he thought it would smooth it out and prevent said silvering. Now, again, this is total horseshit for a couple of reasons. First of all, if your paint is already rough, putting a clear coat on it is not going to make it smoother unless you put enough on it to make it look like a glazed donut. I mean, if you've got bumps in your paint, all you're going to get by putting a clear coat on it is shiny bumps. The other thing is, if it's these surface irregularities that are somehow responsible for silvering, why is it that we can put decals over things like rivets and panel lines without a problem? I mean, really, if something's going to trap air, you'd think those kinds of features would be good candidates. And even more so, a Tiger with Zimmerit on the side of it. Tigers did have Zimmerit, right? I'm pretty ignorant about those German tank things, but nonetheless, that's a pretty rough surface that I've seen people put decals on all day long without silvering. So, again, it's just logic that doesn't really hold up. The only real fact about using a gloss before decals is that nobody, and I mean nobody, has ever proven that it prevents silvering. It's just really, honestly, not necessary, not a thing. Okay, so now, if you're already not pissed off enough after hearing that, let me go on to the next one that deals with gloss coats. I'm sorry about the fly. Anyway, this is another one of my favorites, and this one has to do with scale effect. Not color scale effect, because I'm not going to get into that. That's a category of stupidity that deserves a video all of its own. I'm talking about the idea that the sheen of something should change with the scale. Now, this is just really ridiculous. And I'll explain why. The simple fact is that it's, and I know why people say this. If you, let's say you clear coat with something like a 2K gloss urethane, if you don't polish it, it does tend to have a sort of a plasticky look to it. And it doesn't necessarily look like the real thing. But it doesn't have anything to do with the size. It just simply has to do with the nature of the finish itself. It just doesn't look the same as it does on a full-size vehicle because there's more of it. It's outside. It's smoother. There's all kinds of reasons why it's different. The scale of the orange peel that you get on a model is different than it is on a full-size car. But again, that's about the nature of the finish itself and not necessarily the size. The reflections are obviously full size when they're on a model, even though the model itself is small, and that can make things look weird. But again, that's not about the glossiness of the finish itself. Here's the real thing, though. This is kind of the mathematical proof of how ridiculous this scale gloss thing is. The reflectivity of a surface is a result of how smooth it is, right? We can all agree on that. So the more tiny little bumps a surface has on it, the less reflective it's going to be. That's why flat paint reflects less than gloss paint. Now, if you were to take a measuring device and measure surface roughness across something, what they use is kind of like a little seismometer, where it's a little needle that bounces up and down as it rides across all of those little microscopic bumps. And they come up with a number. It's called the RMS surface finish. And it's used to specify how smooth something is. Like if you decide that you want to order an injection mold and you want it to have a Class A surface finish, that means that the RMS value of all those little bumps across the surface of that thing have to fall below a certain threshold. So, point being is, the reason I'm saying all that is that it's all about the size of all of those little bumps. A mirror finish has much smaller bumps than a matte finish, right? So, if you take your full-size car that's got a full-size gloss coat on it and you shrink it down by 24 times like you would for a car model, now all of those little bumps on that surface should be 24 times smaller, right? Smaller bumps, smoother surface, even shinier, right? So if we're going to go by the scale gloss logic, you would have to rationally conclude that a model would be even shinier than a full-size car, right? But obviously it's not. So anyway, yeah, that whole scale gloss thing also just doesn't hold up. Okay, had a package delivery there. Anyway, on with the show. So, number 3 in my short list of most ridiculous conventional wisdom tropes. And this is the one that honestly really spurred this on, because a couple of days ago over in the Weathered Models group on Facebook, they asked the question, if there was one sentence that you could tell a beginner about weathering, what would it be? What kind of advice? And I was pretty astonished to see how many times people simply said, less is more. And I'm like, what? No. That's one of those things that sounds kind of clever because it's just vague enough and it sounds kind of edgy and smart. But again, it just doesn't really hold up. The whole less is more thing came about, as far as I know, from architecture and industrial design, when the movement was towards modernist designs and more minimalist approaches, as opposed to the more ornate designs of days gone by, I guess. But it doesn't really apply when it comes to weathering. Less is not more. Less is just less. And to promote the idea that something is that less is somehow always better, which I really feel like is what a lot of these people are saying when they repeat this. And I think these are probably people who just maybe don't really like weathering. They prefer things that look new or fresh out of the factory. And that's just fine. Or maybe they're not good at weathering for whatever reason. That's just fine too. If it's not in your comfort zone, if you don't like it, hey, that's totally cool. Not everything is dirty, obviously. Stuff started out clean at some point, and every model we make is really nothing more than a snapshot in time. So clean or dirty, whatever your preference is. But I kind of feel like when people just say, well, but less is more, that basically what they're saying is that less is better. That short sentence really ends in that word, better. Less is more better. And yeah, there are very few things, that I can think of, well, maybe not a few things, but the things that I can think of where less is more better are bad things. Like taxes, obviously, less is more better. Whatever, disease, bad food. But anyway, there are lots of things where less is definitely more better. But when it comes to weathering, in my view, isn't really about more or less. In fact, I'm often seen to say ad nauseum that there really isn't any such thing as over or underdone when it comes to weathering. It's really about good or bad storytelling, which means that there's a right amount for the kind of story that you're trying to tell. So it's not about less or more, it's about deciding what it is that you want to say with this particular piece of work and figuring out what's the appropriate amount of weathering to effectively tell that story. So I kind of just feel like the whole less is more thing is really just sort of asinine. It's just, what does that even mean? It just doesn't really serve to add value to the conversation. But I'm sure, like all kinds of conventional wisdom, it will be repeated plenty more. So, anyway, that's my short list of 3 bits of conventional wisdom that drive me a little bit crazy. I don't know if they drive you crazy or not, or if you agree or not. I'll be interested to see what you guys say in the comments. But that's just my thing. And that is my little bit of devil's mischief for today. So I think I will stop running my mouth and sign off. I'll be curious to know what you guys think about this. This is another one of those why did you make this videos, probably. But hey, these things happen. Anyway, thanks for watching. Much love.